I always dreamed of seeing Paris. I imagined warm coffee on quiet streets, a wool coat and sensible shoes. But dreams fade when people around you treat you like luggage, unwanted, unnecessary, easy to forget. My name is Lorraine, and I never thought I'd say this, but I'm glad they left me behind. It started the way these things always do, quietly. Nothing loud, no confrontation, just a moment that leaves a small crack in your heart, barely noticeable until the cold seeps in. My daughter Tessa called one evening in late January. Her voice was cheerful in that overly rehearsed way she uses when she's hiding something. "Mom, guess what? We're going to Paris." I blinked, pausing mid-stir over a pot of chicken stew. For a moment, I felt a spark, like maybe she meant we as in her and me. Maybe this was her way of saying she remembered all those years I dreamed about Paris and how your dreams tend to shrink when your bones begin to ache. "Oh?" I said, careful, hopeful. "That's wonderful, sweetheart." "Yeah, me, Brandon, and Mia. We booked it last night. 10 days. Eiffel Tower, Montmartre, the Seine. It's going to be magical." My hand slipped slightly on the spoon. "That sounds beautiful." There was a pause. "It's kind of last minute. Spur of the moment. And with your knees and the walking, it just didn't seem fair to drag you into all that." "Drag me?" The word settled in my chest like a stone. "Oh, I understand," I said. I always said that. It was easier than trying to explain that I wasn't made of glass or confusion or inconvenience. "Besides," she added, "you wouldn't want to be cold and miserable, right?" "Right." I smiled through the phone. "Of course. I hope you all have a lovely time." She told me they'd send pictures, that they'd eat a croissant in my honor. I laughed politely and told her to enjoy herself. I even said I'd help with packing if she needed it. But when we hung up, I sat in the quiet kitchen, spoon still in the pot, and realized what had just happened. They were taking my dream, and I wasn't even part of the conversation. Later that evening, I pulled out an old shoebox from the shelf above the coat closet. It was labeled in Walter's handwriting, "Paris Someday." Inside were notes we scribbled to each other over the years, postcards, ideas, jokes, a menu from a French restaurant we loved in our 20s, a small Eiffel Tower charm he bought me once, dangling on a tarnished silver chain. Walter and I had always talked about going to Paris when we retired. We imagined our legs would still carry us, our eyes still see clearly, but time had its way. He passed before we made it happen, and I never quite had the heart to go alone. But I always thought, maybe someday. Maybe Tessa would go with me, maybe Mia. Maybe I'd see it through their eyes. Apparently, they'd rather I just stay home and keep the heater on. A few days later, I bumped into Mia at the pharmacy. She looked radiant, full of the kind of energy only 22-year-olds carry. She hugged me, then showed me a Pinterest board of Paris fits, cute coats, sleek boots, little berets. "I'm so excited, Grandma. It's going to be unforgettable." She mentioned they were flying out the following Thursday. She even showed me a photo of their tickets. First class. I blinked. "That must have been expensive," I said casually. She laughed. "Brandon handled it. He said it was finally time we splurged." Brandon, my son-in-law, a man who couldn't afford a new toaster last Christmas. Something inside me itched. That evening, after tea and a crossword, I opened my banking app. Not something I check obsessively, I've always trusted my family, but something Mia said kept tugging at me. Brandon handled it. And sure enough, there it was. A charge from Chateau Voyages, a travel agency in Paris. Another from Air Nova Airlines, a hotel reservation listed as La Lumière Suites Paris. The charges weren't from weeks ago. They were from this week, and the name listed on the billing details? Lorraine W. Hartley. Me. I stared at the screen, heart slowing. My stomach sank, cold and bitter like a stone dropped into water. They hadn't just left me behind, they'd paid for their family trip with my credit card. I sat in the dark, the app glowing faintly in my hand, and whispered into the stillness of my living room. They stole from me. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was panicking, but because something deeper had settled in my chest. Not fear, not even sadness, just betrayal. A quiet, steady ache that pulsed with every breath. I sat at the kitchen table at 3:17 a.m., the old clock ticking above the stove, my hands folded neatly in front of me. I didn't cry. Not yet. My tears tend to wait until morning when the world is awake, and I can blame it on allergies or the wind. Instead, I reviewed every charge line by line. $5,820 to Chateau Voyage, $3,132 to Air Nova Airlines, $4,165 for a boutique hotel I'd never heard of, and a few smaller ones, Uber, tickets to the Moulin Rouge, even a city walking tour titled Paris Through Her Eyes. Her eyes. They used my card, my name, and had the nerve to make it poetic. I called the bank around 9 a.m., just as the lines opened. A young man named Aaron answered. "Thank you for calling Shoreline Bank. How can I help you today, Miss Hartley?" I explained everything, that I hadn't authorized those purchases, that I hadn't been notified, that the card was still in my wallet. He hesitated when I mentioned it was family. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," he said gently. "We see it more often than you'd think." More often than you'd think. What a terrible thing to be common. He walked me through what needed to be done. A temporary hold on the card first, then a fraud report I could escalate to full. Cancellation once the investigation began. I nodded, writing everything down. "Do you want to press charges, Miss Hartley?" he asked. I paused. Number, not yet. Around noon, I tried to speak to Tessa. I didn't want to accuse, just understand. She answered after a few rings, sounded out of breath, distracted. "Hey, Mom, I'm at the salon. What's up?" "Did you use my card to book the trip?" Silence. "Excuse me? My card. The charges. Oh my God, are you seriously checking my purchases? That's really invasive." "No," I said calmly. "I'm checking mine." Another pause. "Brandon said we'd pay you back. It was just faster to use yours because it has better rewards or something. It's not a big deal." Not a big deal. They charged nearly $15,000 to my account, without my consent, without telling me. "You could have asked," I said, as evenly as I could. Tessa scoffed. "We figured it was kind of a thank you. I mean, you weren't going anyway." That sentence cracked something open inside me. I never said I wasn't going. I wasn't invited. There was no reply, just the faint hiss of a hairdryer in the background. "I'll call you later, Mom," she said finally. "We're kind of in a rush. Don't worry so much." She hung up. After that call, I didn't go back to my chair. I didn't fix the tea I had steeped. I didn't move for a long while. Instead, I stood in the hallway, my knees stiff. My eyes fixed on the hallway table where I kept important things, my ID folder, my expired passport, old bills. The folder was open. My passport was gone. They'd taken it, likely weeks ago, used it to book the travel documents. I walked to my bedroom. The drawer where I kept my travel bag had been disturbed. A few of my scarves, ones I bought with Walter on our honeymoon, were missing. And that's when the tears came. Not dramatic ones. Not loud sobbing, just steady, burning drops that fell without pause as I sat on the edge of my bed, hands in my lap. They didn't just steal money, they stole something sacred. That night, I called Elise, my neighbor and closest friend. She was widowed 10 years ago and had a spine made of iron. I told her everything, the card, the trip, the scarf, my passport. She listened without interrupting, then said, "We're going to fix this." I sniffed. "I don't even know where to start." "Yes, you do," she said. "You're just scared they won't love you after you do it. But Lorraine, they don't respect you now. That's not love." She came over the next morning with coffee and a list. Steps to file a full fraud complaint, printouts for documentation, a form to update my will, just in case. "I'm not dying," I said with a half smile. "No," she said. "You're getting even." That night, I sat on my porch, blanket over my knees, the wind tugging at the trees. They thought I'd never notice. They thought I was too old, too soft, too tired to fight back. But Walter once told me, still waters don't mean shallow ones. And I was deeper than they knew. I picked up a pen, started logging every transaction, every date, every receipt, and then I circled the day they were set to fly out. It was 4 days away. Plenty of time to make a plan. There's a certain ache that only long-held dreams can cause when they shatter. It doesn't happen all at once, like glass or mirrors. It's more like a wine glass tipped onto tile, not broken, just cracked so finely that you don't even notice until it leaks everywhere. That's what Paris was for me, a slow, silent leak of something beautiful I once believed in. Walter and I were married for 39 years. We didn't travel much, not because we didn't want to, but because life had a way of redirecting our plans. We had Tessa young. We worked modest jobs. We prioritized school clothes, braces, car repairs, always meant to travel later. Paris had been our dream since our 3rd anniversary. He brought home a baguette and red wine, set a paper towel on the table like it was a linen cloth, and said, "Tonight, we dine like the French." I still remember laughing so hard I choked on the wine. From that day forward, it became our joke. He'd find little ways to sneak Paris into our lives. A box of macarons, an old travel book from a thrift shop. Once he recorded a language tape and played it while I was cooking. "Bonjour, madame. Où est la bibliothèque?" I said, "Walter, if you take me to a library in Paris, I'll file for divorce." He grinned and kissed my forehead. Deal. We kept a small jar labeled Paris Fund in our closet. We'd put in $20 here and there. We never counted it. That wasn't the point. He passed away before we ever touched it. Cancer doesn't care about your jar of dreams. After he was gone, I sealed the jar with tape, packed the postcards in a shoebox, moved on in the way that you don't really move on. You just keep putting one foot in front of the other because the world doesn't stop for grief. When Tessa announced they were going to Paris, something inside me stirred again, something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. That maybe, just maybe, she remembered how much I loved that city from afar. That maybe she'd invite me. Maybe I'd see the Eiffel Tower and think of Walter. Maybe I'd stand on a cobbled street and whisper, "We made it." But instead, she booked it behind my back, with my name, my card, my passport, and now I was supposed to just sit quietly while they enjoyed the dream I built in secret for 4 decades? 2 days before their flight, I was scrolling through social media when I saw it. Mia had posted a selfie, captioned, "Packing for Paris, Grandma's scarf makes the perfect neck wrap." I zoomed in, and I froze. It was the scarf, a silk blend, ivory and navy, delicate. Walter gave it to me on our 25th anniversary. He bought it from a small boutique in Savannah during a weekend trip, our only trip that decade. He handed it to me in bed with a note that read, "This will look perfect on you in Paris someday." I never wore it. I kept it folded inside a cedar box, wrapped in tissue, waiting for the day it would make sense to wear it. And now, my granddaughter wore it for Instagram likes. They didn't even ask. I walked straight to my bedroom, opened the cedar box. It was empty. Beneath it, I found the faint scent of lavender and a sticky note that read, "Borrowed this, Mia." Borrowed. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the note. A scarf wasn't just a scarf, not when it carried your husband's last promise, not when it had waited decades for the right moment. I looked around the room, my eyes passing over other things, the photo of Walter and me at the beach, the pressed flower in a frame from our first trip, the dusty Paris jar still taped shut in the closet. They had taken everything except the jar. I got up, pulled it down, and placed it on the kitchen table. The tape was yellowed. I peeled it off slowly and for the first time in 20 years, opened it. Inside were small bills and coins, crumpled notes from Walter. One read, "One kiss at the Eiffel, paid in full." I pressed it to my chest. That night, I sat with Elise. I showed her the scarf post, the note, the jar. She didn't say much. just reached over and took my hand. "Elise," I said softly, "they didn't just steal money." "No," she replied. "They stole the one thing they didn't earn. Your story." And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about a trip. It was about dignity, about memory, about not being erased. I watched them upload more photos, suitcases packed, passports in hand, first-class boarding passes. They posed together with coffees, captioned, "Too early for champagne? Not in Paris." The next photo showed Mia holding a boarding pass, and my initials were still visible at the corner. LWHI, traced the screen with my thumb. Then I locked the phone, got up, and walked to my desk. I opened the drawer, pulled out my checkbook, and wrote down the date of their flight. Then I underlined it, and next to it I wrote, "Report card stolen." The morning of their flight was unusually quiet. No wind, no bird song. Just still air, like the sky itself was holding its breath. I sat by the living room window with a cup of tea that had long gone cold, my fingers curled around the mug more for comfort than warmth. Their car pulled into the driveway at 5:42 a.m. I watched from behind the curtain as Brandon loaded the suitcases into the trunk, 3 of them, all hard shell and matching. Tessa wore a trench coat and heels too high for an airport. Mia looked bright and youthful in a beret that didn't belong to her. Probably mine, too. My scarf fluttered at her neck as she turned to take a selfie beside the car. It should have stung, but it didn't. Not anymore. I had moved past anger. What sat in me now was focus, cold, clean focus. They didn't knock, didn't stop to say goodbye. Not even a wave. Tessa looked up briefly toward the house. Her expression was unreadable. I stepped back from the window before she could see me. A moment later, the car reversed and rolled out of the driveway. I stood still, breathing slowly, until I could no longer hear the engine. Then I turned and walked straight to the kitchen table. The documents were already in place. Fraud report, filled out. Copies of charges, highlighted. Photo evidence of the scarf, the boarding pass, and the charges in my banking app. All printed and clipped. Everything neat. Everything quiet, like me. By 6:15 a.m., I was seated across from a bank officer at Shoreline's main branch. Her name was Simone, early 30s, sharp, professional, but kind. "I've reviewed everything, Ms. Hartley," she said, flipping through the papers. "This is, honestly, one of the clearest cases I've seen in a while." "I don't want to ruin their lives," I said. She looked up. "You won't." I nodded, "but I also won't let them keep stealing from mine." Simone gave a small smile. "Would you like us to flag the card now?" I paused. "Number, not yet. Wait until they're in the air." She tilted her head, curious. "Why?" "Because I want them to feel like they got away with it. Just for a little while." At 8:40 a.m., I opened the flight tracker on my tablet. Air Nova 276 to Paris, scheduled for takeoff at 9 a.m. Boarding, now in progress. I imagined them breezing through security, flashing passports and boarding passes, sipping overpriced coffee, all on my dime. I made myself a fresh cup of tea and stood in the garden, watching the late summer sun rise. It painted the trees in soft gold. By 9:05 a.m., the plane icon showed departed. I walked back inside, sat at my desk, and dialed the bank again. Simone answered, as promised. "They're in the air," I said. Her voice was steady. "Understood. I'll begin the report now." "Cancel the card," I said. "File it as stolen." She paused. "Would you like to press charges today, or wait until the fraud team finishes their investigation?" "Wait," I replied. "Let's give them time to settle in." Simone chuckled softly. "You're a very patient woman, Miss Hartley." I nodded. "I've had a lifetime of practice." That afternoon, Elise came over with soup and shortbread cookies. "Is it done?" she asked, setting down the tray. I nodded. "Card canceled. Hotel reservation canceled too. The room was in my name. I called and told them I wasn't traveling anymore due to medical concerns." Elise raised her brows. "Did you get charged?" Nope. Non-refundable for them, fully refundable for me. She whistled. Did you sleep okay last night? She asked. I looked at her, a little surprised. Yes, I said, for the first time in months. Later that evening, I got a text from Mia. Landed! Bonjour, Grandma. I stared at it for a long while. A girl who didn't even think to ask before using my scarf, who didn't care where it came from, just that it looked good in pictures. I typed a reply, then deleted it. Instead, I tapped the phone, opened the banking app, and watched as each charge turned gray with the words, disputed. Under investigation that night, I opened the Paris jar one last time. I took out the small note Walter had written. We'll get there. Maybe not today, maybe not even together, but I promise we'll get there. I tucked it into my purse. I had no intention of growing bitter, but I was done being soft. Paris was no longer a dream I'd wait around for. Now it was a quiet fire under my feet, and they had just lit the match. The first call came less than 12 hours after they landed. I was stirring honey into my chamomile tea when my phone lit up. Tessa. Incoming call. I let it ring the first time, and the second. On the third, I answered. Her voice was tight and clipped, the kind of tone she used when she was 2 steps away from losing control. Mom! What the hell did you do? I didn't ask how she was. I didn't ask how the flight went. I just blew gently on my tea and said, Good morning. The hotel says your card was declined, she snapped. They won't let us check in. Oh, I said, feigning surprise. That's odd. I reported it stolen this morning. You what? I figured since someone used it without my permission, it must have been compromised. A pause on the other end, then a bark. That someone was us, Mom. Exactly, I said, and took a sip. She launched into excuses. Brandon had meant to pay me back. They were going to surprise me with something special from the trip. It was just easier to book it in my name because of the travel insurance. All lies, smooth and careless. The kind of lies people use when they think you've already forgiven them. I didn't say you could use it, I said quietly. And you never even asked? We're standing here in the lobby with our bags, Mom. Mia is embarrassed, Brandon is furious, and this is making us look like fools. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Well, I said, if the shoe fits. Silence. You're not seriously going to leave us stranded in a foreign country. You left me out of my own dream, I said. I'm just returning the favor. Then I ended the call. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Brandon. I let it go to voicemail, then Mia, then a string of increasingly frantic texts. MIA. Grandma, please just fix it. MIA, we didn't know it was going to be a problem. MIA, they're fighting and I don't know what to do. MEA, please, I stared at the last one. Something about it almost got to me. Almost. But then I remembered.
Leaves above a patch of shaded grass. Somewhere in that sound was the promise that tomorrow would come in its own time, carrying the same quiet grace.
You should go, she said. Not to Paris. Somewhere quieter. Somewhere just for you. I thought about it. For the first time, I didn't feel like I had to earn the trip. They'd already paid for it, with interest. The text slowed by the third day. By then, I imagined the glow of Paris had dulled. Their Instagram posts had stopped completely. No Eiffel Tower, no pastries, no romantic streetlights. The last one was from Mia 2 days prior. A dimly lit picture of a sandwich with the caption, "When life gives you baguettes but no butter." It was passive-aggressive, vague enough to fly under most people's radar, but clear enough for me. Something had gone very wrong. I sat with Elise that afternoon, both of us sipping lemonade on the porch, as I opened my phone and read the bank's update out loud. Due to confirmed unauthorized activity, your account has been credited for the disputed charges. Please retain documentation in case of follow-up. They refunded everything, I said quietly. Every last cent. Elise raised her glass. To justice. We clinked, but something still sat heavy in my chest. Not guilt, a strange kind of sadness, like mourning a version of your family that maybe never really existed. That evening, I got a call from Mia. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was shaky, like she'd been crying. "Grandma, I don't know what's happening. They won't stop fighting. We're in this tiny motel outside the city. Brandon's card didn't work. Mine has a limit. Mom's just... I don't know. Can you please call me? I know what we did was wrong, but I don't think she even sees that. I just wanted to go to Paris." I sat still for a while after that. She sounded young, not cruel, just foolish, but I couldn't undo what they had done. And I wouldn't. That night, I opened my old cedar box and pulled out the travel journal Walter and I had started decades ago. Inside, his handwriting filled the margins with dreams and doodles and restaurant names he clipped from brochures. Page after page of plans. Not a single one included, "Let them walk over you." I picked up a pen and added my own entry to a blank page. "Someday is no longer a date I believe in. I choose today." The next day, Brandon called. I answered this time. His voice was sharp and cold. "This is ridiculous." "Good morning to you, too." "We're grown adults, Lorraine. You don't just pull the rug out from under people like this." I almost laughed. "You're right," I said. "I should have pulled it sooner." He scoffed. "We're stuck in a place that smells like a locker room. Mia's sleeping on a cot. Tessa hasn't stopped crying. We haven't eaten a real meal in 2 days." "So?" I asked calmly. "So, congratulations. You made your point." "No," I replied. "You made my point." A pause, the kind where silence grows teeth. "You're vindictive," he said. "Number I'm." 72, I said, voice steady. "Which means I've lived long enough to recognize abuse when it shows up dressed as family." Then I hung up. Later that afternoon, my lawyer called. "I've reviewed the voicemail from your son-in-law and the message from your granddaughter," he said. "If you'd like to proceed with a civil claim, we can file next week." "Not yet," I said. "I want one more thing to happen first." "What's that?" "I want them to feel something real. Hunger, shame, uncertainty. The kind they thought they could push onto me while they drank champagne under someone else's name." "Understood," he said. "I'll have everything prepared." That night, Elise and I watched an old black and white film. I forgot the name. Something with long shots of Paris streets and a woman in a wide hat. I couldn't stop staring at the background. The benches, the flower carts, the riverbanks. Not because I longed to be there, but because I was starting to realize I didn't need them to take me. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd stolen my dream and dragged it through the mud. But the thing about dreams, they're not made of money. They're made of memory. And I still had mine. The next morning, Mia sent one last message. MEIA. "Grandma. Please, I'll pay you back myself. I swear. Just help us get out of here. They're acting like animals. I just want to go home." I stared at it for a long time, then replied, "Me. I hope someday you understand what you've done. Not just with a card, but with my trust. Until then, I suggest you learn how to get home the way you got there. Without me." The envelope was thick, cream-colored, embossed with Hartley and Dempsey Legal Services. I placed it gently into the mailbox that morning, knowing exactly what it contained. Inside were 3 copies of a formal legal notice, intent to pursue civil action for financial fraud and identity misuse. Drafted with precision by my attorney, it outlined every charge they'd made under my name, every violation of federal and international banking terms, and the emotional distress caused by their deliberate deceit. I wasn't bluffing anymore. This was real. Later that day, I received a text from Tessa. "Tessa, we just got served. Are you serious right now? What happened to family?" I stared at those words. What happened to family? As if she hadn't already answered that question. As if she hadn't stripped me of that title the moment she used my passport like a library card and took what wasn't hers. My lawyer had advised I remain calm, avoid any direct confrontation, but I couldn't resist one short reply. Me. Family doesn't steal from family. No response. Just a notification 2 hours later that Tessa had blocked my number. The irony nearly made me laugh. Elise came over that evening, bringing a small lemon tart and 2 forks. "How do you feel?" she asked, as I served the slices onto porcelain plates. "Lighter," I said. Like I finally closed a door I didn't realize had been open too long. She raised her eyebrows. "Any guilt?" I thought for a moment. Number not guilt. Maybe regret. That it had to come to this. But not for doing it. Number never. That weekend, I received an email from Air Nova's customer support. "Dear Ms. Hartley, your refund has been fully processed and credited to your account. We apologize for the inconvenience you experienced regarding unauthorized use of your identity. Please know that the passengers in question have been blacklisted from future bookings under your name." I read the last sentence again, slowly. "Blacklisted from future bookings under your name." It felt final, clean, like someone had sealed a vault. The next morning, Elise and I sat down with a large paper map of France spread out on my kitchen table. "Let's plan your trip," she said. "Paris?" I asked. She shook her head. "Too cliché. Too many ghosts. Let's start somewhere simpler." She pointed to a small town in the south, L'Isle-sur-la-Sorgue. Quiet, serene, antique markets, lavender fields. I looked at the photos online. Stone cottages, riverbanks, little cafes with ivy-wrapped balconies. It didn't have the Eiffel Tower, but it had peace, and it had me in it. By Tuesday, I had booked my own ticket, business class, paid in full, under my name. No borrowed cards, no deceit, no one to answer to. Just a woman, finally traveling on her own terms. That night, I pulled out my suitcase, the same one I'd had for years, barely used, still with the plastic on the handle. I packed slowly, deliberately. 2 cardigans, 3 scarves, not the one they stole. That one I'd folded into a sealed box marked "Do Not Return." A simple beige dress I'd saved for something special, and Walter's note. "We'll get there. Maybe not today. Maybe not even together. But I promise. We'll get there." I tucked it between the pages of the travel journal, zipped my suitcase, and placed it by the door. For the first time in decades, it wasn't waiting in vain. I checked my account one last time before bed. Everything was clean. Funds restored, new card, new password, new sense of self. Then I opened Mia's Instagram page again. It was private now. Her last post was gone. But her story was still up. A simple black background with white text. You think you know someone, until you realize they were never really on your side. I smiled, closed the app, and whispered aloud, "No, sweetheart. You just assumed I'd never stand up for myself. And you were wrong." The plane touched down in Marseille to the scent of lavender and the faint hum of cicadas outside the airport windows. It wasn't Paris. It was better. Because it was mine. No stolen credit cards, no borrowed dreams, no guilt woven into the seams of my suitcase. Just me. And Walter's note tucked safely in my coat pocket. The car. Ride to L'Isle-sur-la-Sorgue took less than an hour, winding through sunflower fields, olive groves, and tiny villages with crooked stone buildings. I watched from the back seat of the taxi, my fingers resting on the window, tracing the rolling hills with quiet awe. When we arrived in the village, it was like stepping into a watercolor. Canals ran through the center of town, lined with footbridges, flower boxes, and open-air markets. The air was thick with the scent of thyme and warm bread. People moved slowly here, like time didn't chase them the way it chased us back home. My room was upstairs in a cozy stone guest house, above a bakery that opened at 6 and closed when the last croissant sold. The window overlooked a garden filled with wisteria and bees, the kind of place where no one would ever dare say, "You're too old to enjoy this." The next morning I woke early. My knees cracked and creaked as they always did, but I stretched, smiled, and got dressed without rush. I walked down to the bakery, said bonjour with my best accent, and the older woman behind the counter lit up like I'd just recited poetry. Un pain au chocolat, s'il vous plaît, I said carefully. She handed it to me warm, wrapped in paper, with a nod and a wink. As I walked through the sleepy cobblestone streets, pastry in hand, I thought of Tessa, of how sure she'd been that I'd be miserable traveling, of how confidently she decided that Paris was too fast, too loud, too much for someone like me. And yet, here I was, alone, at peace, full of pastry, and not missing them one bit. In the afternoons, I wandered through markets and bought little things I'd never use: lavender soap, hand-painted postcards, tiny tins of olive oil. In the evenings, I sat on the balcony and wrote letters to Walter in the journal we started long ago. "You would have loved this, darling," I wrote. "The way the bells echo from the church tower, the way the air smells like rosemary and old stone. I saw a couple dancing in the square today. They must have been in their 80s. No one stared, they just danced." Sometimes I'd tuck a flower between the pages before I closed the book, not as a bookmark, but as proof. Proof I had been here. Proof this dream hadn't died with him. On my third day, I took a small riverboat cruise with 6 strangers. An older woman from Italy sat beside me and told me she took a solo trip every summer since her husband passed. "People thought I was crazy," she laughed. "But it's better than sitting home waiting for someone to call." I nodded. "I think waiting was the worst thing I ever did," I admitted. She patted my hand. "Then you've already won. You stopped." At night, I'd light the small candle Elise packed in my suitcase. She'd written in tiny pen across the lid, "For when you remember, you are more than what they think of you." And I'd sit in silence, listening to the wind, the faint laughter of young couples below, the creak of old shutters in the breeze, and I'd feel whole, not lonely, not left behind, just me, at 72, owning a space the world once told me I was too late for. One morning, I passed a violinist on the bridge playing La Vie en Rose. My throat tightened. I stood quietly, just listening, letting the notes settle into the cracks that betrayal had left behind. Walter used to hum that song while doing dishes. I closed my eyes. He was there with me, not in the breeze or the clouds or any poetic nonsense. He was in the choice to be here, in the courage to come, in every step I took without permission. Later that afternoon, I stopped at a local shop and bought a single postcard. It had a painting of a French woman walking along a riverbank with her head held high. I didn't write anything on it, just placed it carefully into the pocket of my coat, as a reminder that some trips aren't about where you go. They're about who you finally become when you stop waiting to be invited. By the time I returned to the States, summer had surrendered to fall. The air was crisp, the leaves had begun to curl at the edges, and my front porch smelled faintly of pine needles and cooling earth. I stood for a moment just looking at my house, small, unassuming, quiet. It felt different now, like it belonged to someone braver. I rolled my suitcase up the steps slowly, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. It didn't feel like I'd come home. It felt like I'd returned from someplace I'd needed to go to remember who I was. There were 7 envelopes waiting in my mailbox. 4 were bills. 2 were catalogs. 1 was from Tessa. I turned it over in my hands. No handwriting, just a typed label. From the Jensen family. Family. Funny how that word had begun to lose its shape. I set it on the counter, made myself a cup of chamomile, then finally sat down and opened it. Inside was a neatly typed 2-page letter, signed by all 3 of them. No greeting, no dear mom, no warmth, just a statement, an explanation, a soft, sanitized confession. We regret the misunderstanding that led to this situation. Our intention was never to cause harm or distress. The use of your card was never malicious. It was simply a logistical choice. We hope you will find it in your heart to recognize that families make mistakes. And the final line, We ask that you drop any legal action in the spirit of reconciliation. I read it twice. Then I set it down and stared out the window for a long time. No apology, no ownership, no acknowledgement that they took more than money, that they took trust, respect, my late husband's last promise, and turned it into an all-expense-paid betrayal. They were asking me to forgive a wound they wouldn't admit to causing. I called Mr. Hartley the next morning. "I received their letter," I said. "And?" "It was hollow," I replied. "Proceed with the civil claim." There was a pause. I could almost hear him smiling. "Understood. I'll file this afternoon." That week, I updated my will. It had been years since I'd touched it. But now, the edits came easily. I removed Tessa and Brandon entirely. They had made their choices. So had I. As for Mia, I left her something. But not everything. Just a conditional scholarship fund. She would receive access to it after she completed 200 hours of community service. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I wanted her to understand value, to know that money is not owed, it's entrusted. And trust, once broken, requires work. The rest? I gave to a foundation that provides travel grants for older women, women who, like me, had waited their whole lives for someday. No more waiting. Elise and I began working on a blog together, her idea. We called it Later Than Never. She handled the tech. I wrote small essays from my trip, pairing them with photos from the villages and bridges and quiet cafes. We didn't expect anyone to read it, but they did. Hundreds of women, some from as far as Scotland and New Zealand, wrote in. One said, "My daughter told me I'd embarrass her in Italy, so I didn't go. I won't make that mistake again." Another wrote, "They left me behind, too. But your story made me book the ticket anyway." I cried reading them, not because I was sad, but because I wasn't alone. Then came the day I didn't expect. A car pulled up in my driveway. I was trimming dead leaves from my porch plants when I looked up. Tessa, Brandon, Mia. They climbed out slowly, looking tired, thinner, aged by consequence. Tessa was holding flowers, cheap ones from the supermarket. Brandon had a folder in his hand, probably full of excuses or last-minute pleas. Mia stood back, her face unreadable. I didn't move from the porch. "Mom," Tessa said, "can we talk?" "About what?" "Everything." She took a few steps forward. "We made mistakes. We know that." I said nothing. Brandon cleared his throat. "We just want this all to be over." "Oh," I said. "You mean the part where you fraudulently used my card, impersonated me to a travel agency, then told me I was too old for the trip?" They all froze. Mia's head dropped slightly. "I'm sorry," she said softly. The first true apology I'd heard. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Tessa and Brandon, though? Still silent, still looking for the shortcut through accountability. I stepped down from the porch slowly, handed Brandon a manila envelope and said, "That's the court date." He blinked. "You're really going through with it?" I already did. They left without saying goodbye, and I didn't watch them drive away. I simply turned back to my garden and got back to pruning what no longer bloomed. The next morning, I woke before the sun. It wasn't nerves, it was clarity. For the first time in years, I didn't feel bound to an invisible obligation to keep the peace at my own expense. There's a peculiar kind of freedom in realizing you no longer owe someone your silence. I sat at my kitchen table, a fresh cup of coffee steaming beside my notebook. The will sat open in front of me, freshly signed the day before. Page after page reflected my new reality. No Tessa, no Brandon. Mia's inheritance tied to service, not entitlement. The rest, a sum that would have once bought houses and cars, was earmarked for something far better, the Someday Fund, a travel grant program for women over 65 who'd never had the chance to take the trip they'd always dreamed of. They could apply for airfare, accommodations, and a small stipend for expenses. The only requirement was that they go somewhere they'd been told they were too old to enjoy. It felt poetic. The very words that had been used to erase me would now become the fire that carried other women forward. Elise came by mid-morning with scones and her laptop. "You're really doing it?" she asked, eyes scanning the foundation paperwork. "Not just doing it," I said, "naming it." I slid the folder toward her. "The Walter Hartley Someday Fund." She smiled, soft but proud. "You're making him part of the trip after all." "That's the point," I said. "He didn't get to see Paris, but through this, maybe someone else will." The blog was growing faster than we expected. Dozens of women had already reached out with their travel stories. Some were funny, others heartbreaking, but all of them shared the same thread, a kind of quiet resilience that only comes from decades of being underestimated. One woman from Maine sent me a postcard of a lighthouse with the words, "My husband always told me it was too far to drive. I went last week, alone. Thank you," I kept it pinned above my desk, a reminder that even small distances are worth crossing. A week later, I received an email from Mr. Hartley. "The court date is confirmed. They will be required to appear in person. You can choose to attend or have your statement read on your behalf." I decided I'd attend, not for confrontation, not for revenge, but because I wanted them to see me, not as their bank, not as their fallback plan, but as the woman who finally closed the door. In the meantime, Elise and I booked another trip, this time together, a week in the Scottish Highlands in the spring. She'd always dreamed of going, but had been told by her late brother, "It's too damp for someone your age." We laughed about it as we clicked, "Confirm booking." "Too old for damp," she said, shaking her head. "Guess we'll have to pack umbrellas and prove them wrong," I replied. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sky burn pink over the horizon. I thought of Tessa as a little girl, her hair tangled from the wind, clutching my hand as we walked along the boardwalk. I thought of the way she used to run ahead, but always glance back to make sure I was following. Somewhere along the way, she'd stopped looking back. I'd spent years trying to keep up. Now, I realized, I didn't have to chase her anymore. Inside, my phone pinged with a new message from the blog's inbox. It was from a woman named Carol in Arizona. "They told me my hips wouldn't survive Italy. I've booked my ticket for Rome in March. I'm walking those streets, even if I have to do it slow. Thank you for showing me it's never too late." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting her words settle. It wasn't just my legacy I was building. It was a chorus of women, all stepping out of the shadows of too late and into the light of right now. And for the first time in my life, I felt like the trip had truly begun. It happened 3 weeks before the court date. I was in the middle of repotting my jade plant when I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Not the confident, honking arrival of someone visiting on good terms. This was slower, hesitant, like they weren't sure if they should be here at all. When I stepped out onto the porch, I saw them. Tessa, Brandon, Mia. No flowers this time. No cheap smiles. Just 3 figures standing at the edge of the porch steps, their expressions wearing equal parts exhaustion and calculation. "Mom," Tessa began, her voice softer than usual. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I said, staying exactly where I was. I wasn't about to invite them inside. Brandon shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Look, we've had a rough few weeks." "You don't say." Mia's eyes darted between us, her face pale. She looked like she wanted to be anywhere but here. "We made mistakes," Tessa continued, "and maybe we didn't handle things the right way, but dragging us into court, Mom, it's going to ruin us." "You didn't seem concerned about ruining me," I said quietly. "That's different," Brandon blurted. "We thought you'd understand, that you'd—" "What?" I interrupted. "Smile and wave while you emptied my account? Pretend it didn't matter?" They fell silent. Mia finally spoke. "Grandma, I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I shouldn't have gone along with it. I didn't realize how wrong it was until we were stuck over there. I've been thinking about it a lot. It was the first genuine apology I'd heard from any of them, and I believed her. But an apology from one person didn't erase the actions of the other two. "Please, Mom," Tessa said, "drop the charges. We'll pay you back." "How?" Her eyes flickered down. She didn't answer. Brandon stepped in. "We'll figure it out, but a court case will follow us forever." "Funny," I said, because that's exactly what I wanted to make sure of. I walked inside, leaving the door open. When I came back, I was holding a large manila envelope. "This," I said, handing it to Brandon, "is the court summons. Consider it your official reminder that actions have consequences." He stared at it like it might burn him. "You're really going to make us go through with this?" "You already did," I replied. Tessa's eyes narrowed, a flash of the same sharpness she'd had as a teenager when told no. "You're vindictive," she spat. "No," I said evenly. "I'm finished being convenient." I turned to Mia. "I heard your apology, and it matters. But you're still going to have to live with the choices you made. All of you are." I stepped back onto the porch, letting the afternoon sun fall across my shoulders. "You've got 3 weeks to prepare. I suggest you use them wisely." Then I closed the door. Through the curtain, I watched them walk back to the car. Brandon's grip was tight around the envelope. Tessa's shoulders were rigid. Mia lagged behind, looking back once, not with anger, but with something that almost looked like regret. Almost. When the sound of the engine faded, I sat back down at my table, brushed the dirt from my hands, and picked up my jade plant again. It was still in my care, still mine to protect, just like my life. The court date came and went like a storm, brief, loud, leaving the air sharper than before. They showed up, dressed as if appearances could erase actions. The judge listened patiently, his eyes scanning the documents my lawyer had prepared, bank statements, hotel booking receipts, even the screenshots of their own posts flaunting the trip. When it was over, the ruling was clear: full restitution, plus legal fees, and a formal notation of fraud that would follow them in every credit application for years. It wasn't about the money. It never had been. It was about standing in that room, looking them in the eye, and knowing I hadn't folded just because it would have been easier. Afterward, I walked out of the courthouse alone. The autumn sun was warm on my face, the kind of warmth that made you feel lighter, as if the air itself was congratulating you for finally choosing yourself. I stopped at a cafe on the corner, ordered a latte, and took out Walter's note from my bag. "We'll get there. Maybe not today. Maybe not even together. But I promise, we'll get there." I traced the handwriting with my finger. Maybe I hadn't gone to Paris yet, but I'd gone somewhere far more important, somewhere he'd be proud to see me reach. 2 weeks later, Elise came over with her laptop and a grin. "What if," she said, "we finally stopped talking about someday?" She spun the laptop around. On the screen, a photo of the Eiffel Tower glowing against the night sky. Below it, the words, "Paris, spring departure." I stared at it for a long time. The ache was still there, but it had changed. It wasn't longing anymore. It was permission. "Book it," I said. This time, it was under my name. Paid in cash. No borrowed cards. No borrowed company. Just me. A woman who had spent most of her life accommodating everyone else's comfort, finally taking up space in her own story. The morning after I booked it, I walked into my closet and reached for the cedar box. Inside, folded neatly, was the scarf. Not the one Mia had taken. That one had been returned and placed away for good. This was another. A deep wine-red silk Walter had bought on a whim decades ago. I draped it around my neck, looked in the mirror, and smiled. I was ready. As I zipped up my suitcase weeks later, Elise appeared at my door holding a small envelope. "For the plane," she said. Inside was a handwritten note. "You were never too old." They were just too small. And as the plane lifted off that spring morning, I thought about every too old I'd ever been told. Too old to travel, too old to start over, too old to say no. And I thought of Walter's promise. He was right. We'd get there, and I'd finally learned. Paris may wait, but dignity never can.